All right, class. So this will be the first of two videos going over the content from chapter 2. It's all about planning a healthy diet. Let's talk about what dieting kind of looks like, what guidelines are available from governmental entities as far as historical research, some of the updates that have come in more modern research. So yeah, just a general overview of what is suggested for eating a healthful diet, and then how you could apply that to things like buying your groceries and eating out. So, although we're going to be looking at a lot of suggestions that are technically backed by research, as I mentioned in the last video, we are kind of in the middle of a dietary revolution or a nutritional revolution as far as our understanding of how different foods affect our bodies, how different nutrients affect our bodies. And so most nutritional advice should be taken with a grain of salt. We're kind of relearning everything. And so a lot of what has historically been suggested is not necessarily supported any longer. But it is still provided in the textbook. It is still what a lot of our dietary advice that you can find online is based off of. So we're going to look at it, discuss it. But just to mention another book by the author, Michael Pollan, right, the author of The Omnivore's Dilemma. This is In Defense of Foods. And the general idea here is that in order to eat healthy, really, you just need to eat food, not too much of it, and make sure you're eating mostly plants. If these are the 3 simple rules that you apply to eating, you are likely to be getting a majority of your nutrients in a relatively healthy way. Okay? Plants like vegetables and fruits are going to provide you with a lot of healthy fats, like unsaturated fats. This is the main natural source of a majority of our important vitamins and minerals. And so as long as you are not overeating very often and you're getting a varied diet of a lot of plants, you are likely to be doing a good job as far as producing a healthy diet. Anyways, with that in mind, let's get into the content from the text. So what is a diet? Is it something, is it an eating plan that is going to restrict your food intake? Maybe, depending on your goals with dieting. Restricting certain types of foods could be helpful in achieving that goal. Is it a plan that reduces calorie intake? Again, maybe, depending on your health goals. Is it a plan that eliminates fatty foods? According to historical advice, very likely. Again, our modern understanding of how fats affect our body is changing. So historically, avoiding saturated fats and cholesterol, which are very common in animal fats, like butter and dairy products, those were historically seen as being unhealthy. Modern research is showing that those previous studies may not have been accurate or may not have been looking in the right places. So we're kind of reevaluating the effects of saturated fat. It is known that trans fat is unhealthy. There is a lot of research supporting the negative health effects of trans fat. But other than that, fat is not bad for you. It is a source of energy that your body is used to using and relies on quite heavily. So, though you may find diets that are suggesting that you eliminate fatty foods, again, that's something to take with a grain of salt. Is it a plan that eliminates tasty foods? Hopefully not. Right? The taste factor of your food is all about how it's prepared. So just learning how to prepare your foods in a way that tastes good for you would allow you to eat still the variety of foods that you like, or the type or healthier foods, and still make them taste good. Is it one that eliminates junk food? This is very likely. Processed foods, so anything that has been changed in some way from its natural form, is going to be removing variety of the nutrients that were originally in that food. So every step that is taken to change the form of food from its natural source is going to remove some part of the nutritional value from that food, including how you cook it. Right? As you cook your food, the more cooked it is, the more of those beneficial nutrients are being removed or changed into a form that is not as accessible and not as helpful. But anyways, diets are going to vary based on what your goals are. And a diet in general, the term diet, when I'm referring to diet, I'm just talking about what you eat, right? Everybody has a diet. everybody eats something. That is your diet, right? Diet plans are more of making specific choices and decisions to try to achieve a particular goal. So the principle and guidelines to consider when trying to plan a healthy diet are adequacy, so ensuring that you're getting enough of the different nutrients in order to support your health. Moderation, so being careful with overeating specific types of nutrients. Right? In the last video, we talked about that tolerable upper intake level, that you can have too much of particular nutrients, even to the point of making them toxic when talking about micronutrients. So making sure you are being careful with overeating things that are, again, you'll see suggestions to try to reduce the amount of fat, but that part is now debatable. But added sugar has been shown time and again to increase susceptibility to health diseases, especially with something like diabetes. Right? So trying to reduce the as much as possible this added sugar. It's simple, refined sugar that is not as useful as the natural carbohydrates, the natural sugars that we get from plants. Making sure that your diet is balanced, so you're getting the suggested or general getting the generally recommended proportions for the various types of nutrients. Adding variation to your diet is a great way to ensure that you are getting all of your micronutrients. Right? If you increase the different types of foods that you're eating throughout the day, you're getting more and more exposure to different types of nutrients through those foods. And then lastly, focusing on nutrient density rather than energy density. So in chapter 1, we went over a few examples of how to calculate the energy density of a food. So that's how many calories are in each gram of whatever thing you're eating. Typically, nutrient density and energy density are going to be negatively correlated. So the more energy dense a food is, typically the less nutrient dense it is. So you want to focus on getting a high amount of nutrients in your meals rather than a high amount of energy. A balance of that is totally fine. Right? It's okay to eat energy dense foods. It's not a bad thing. But just ensuring that you're also getting nutrients from nutrient dense foods is going to be really helpful in promoting your overall health. So here's the example that we used in chapter 1 as far as calculating energy density. So of our 2 meals here, you would have to eat a lot more of meal 1 in order to get the same amount of energy into your body compared to meal 2. Right? However, meal 1 here has a lot more variety. Right? Meal 2 is just 2 donuts with a cup of coffee. These donuts are going to be really high in saturated fats and really high in added sugars. Whereas breakfast 1 over here has a lot of variation. It's going to give you a lot of all of the nutrients that we're trying to target, including your vitamins and minerals. And thus, breakfast 1 would be more nutrient dense. Even though breakfast 2 was more energy dense, it is nutrient poor. You can see the breakdown of the different nutrients that are in these 2 foods. So our nutrient dense breakfast here has almost double or more than double the protein, way more fiber, way more vitamin D, way more calcium, almost double the amount of iron, way more potassium, right? Whereas our nutrient poor breakfast here, though it is energy dense and provides a lot of calories for your body to use, a lot of energy for your cells to access, it's not giving a lot of the nutrients that they need to actually regulate those processes. So again, I know I've said this a couple times already in this one video, but take diet suggestions with a grain of salt. These are the dietary guidelines that are provided by the textbook and are provided by governmental entities that are supposed to be protecting our health, but still they rely on some outdated research now. So just take these things with a grain of salt. One of the most popular and widely used guidelines as far as developing dietary plans is the USDA, so the United States Department of Agriculture's Dietary Guidelines for Americans. This is updated every 5 years or so, or exactly every 5 years. So the most recent one being released in 2020. They also released the food guide My Plate. You guys have probably seen this image in lots of places, very, very popular. just shows general portions of different types of foods that you should try to include in one meal on your plate. So allows for a lot more individuality, a lot more choice of what type of carb, grain, dairy product you're eating, but just suggesting that general sizes are in that range. And you'll see what I'm talking about when we look at the My Plate image. And then there's some diet plans provided by entities like the National Institute of Health, such as the Produce for Better Health plan. And then lastly, we'll look at the food labels and nutrition facts panels. So these were not always a requirement, right? But as industrialization of food production has grown larger and larger, and now a majority of the foods in our grocery stores are produced foods, we are going to, now that most of the foods in our grocery stores are produce foods, right? They've been changed in some way from the natural form. It's become more and more critical that the consumer has information available to them about what they're actually buying, right? So what is actually in that box, that container that you are purchasing, behind all of the glitz and glamour of the colorful imaging and the fun commercials that make certain claims about the food. There needs to be information, factual information about what is on there or what is in that food. So that's where these food labels and nutrition facts panels will come into play. So this is an image from the most recent edition of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. Again, these are produced and revised every 5 years, the most recent being in 2020. And this is a list of just general advice for nutrition and health stemming from research from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Okay. So according to these guidelines, a healthy diet should include a wide variety of vegetables. Remember, variety being one of those principles you should listen to. Whole fruits. Okay, so whole fruits as opposed to the processed packaged fruits, right? Like the fruit cups, as opposed to fruit juices, as opposed to fruit drinks. Right? So there is a difference between a fruit juice and a fruit drink. Right? Fruit juice actually has something from the actual fruits in it. Fruit drinks are just flavored, or sorry, I don't know why I'm stumbling so much. Fruit drinks are just flavored drinks to taste similar to these fruits. So anyways, a wide variety of vegetables, whole fruits, focusing on a diet that is high in fiber and whole grain foods. When purchasing dairy or eating dairy, trying to focus on fat-free or low-fat dairy. Again, this is one of those things that is being highly revised and we need more modern research about in order to understand the impacts of eating saturated fat and cholesterol in your diet. It's also suggested to get a variety of protein-rich foods, specifically focusing on lean meat, so meat that is low in fat content, again, to try to avoid those saturated fats. And then including oils. These are unsaturated fats. There is a lot of research to support that unsaturated fats are generally healthy and are easy to use for our bodies. And so this healthy diet would also try to limit those saturated fats. Again, that's what you would be getting from dairy or from eating less lean meat. You'd get a lot of these saturated fats. Limiting trans fats. This is something that there's a lot of research supporting to be unhealthy. Trans fats are a artificial version of fat. So think about margarine. I can't believe it's not butter, right? Those spreadable butters, those are trans fats. It is taking a saturated fat and making it less solid, so it's spreadable, by adding hydrogen to it, essentially by hydrogenating it. But at the molecular level of what that does to the structure of that fat affects how our bodies can use it. It is an artificial fat. Our bodies aren't evolved to consume and utilize that type of molecule, and so it can have some negative health benefits. And finally, limiting added sugar. This is a strongly supported health advice. Right? Added sugar is a refined, processed version of sugar, typically stemming from corn, high fructose corn syrup, those kinds of things. And that added sugar is more likely to just get turned into fat and stored in the body rather than being broken down or utilized as a source of energy the way our natural processes are set up to use it. Right? So the main main areas of nutrition that are well supported by the science is anything artificial is usually going to be worse for your health than something natural. So these trans fats and added sugars. Also trying to limit sodium intake. Sodium is a mineral that is important for our bodies. We use it for lots of different processes, but because salt is so common in our foods to make them taste better, it is really easy to get near that upper intake level, that UL, and potentially consume too much of it, thus producing potential health deficits or things that are harmful for your body. And then lastly, limiting alcohol consumption. Alcohol is a molecule that has the potential to provide energy in it. It's 7 kilocalories per gram on average available in 1 gram of alcohol. However, alcohol as a molecule negatively affects the other metabolic processes occurring in your cells, and thus overall is going to decrease the amount of energy you are producing or utilizing from those molecules. So it's actually negative to your health, even though there is energy available in it. All right. So my plate is kind of just a graphic representation of those findings and of those suggestions. So this is something you see a lot in like schools, elementary, middle, and high schools, posted in the cafeterias. I think there's even one on the first floor of our science and math building here in that main common area that students can use to study in between classes or just hang out between classes. And it's just giving general depictions of portion sizes that should be on a plate from these different food groups. But in general, it's focusing on variety, right? The proportion, so the amount, and thus providing you with different types of nutrients. And so that's what this looks like. So kind of hard to apply this, at least in my opinion. Right? It's giving you general portions that should be on a plate. So you get the idea that on your plate, you should mainly have plant products. You have your vegetables, fruits, and grains. These are all from plants. It allows for a little bit of dairy, but still is pointing out that you should try to aim for low fat or fat-free dairy, and then has some protein here. And so, yeah, again, I don't know. I think that I find this hard to apply and not very useful. So take it how you will. Something to mention here that is provided with the USDA My Plate is a suggestion that you start with small changes. This is a suggestion that applies to any habitual change. If you are trying to change a habit, trying to change a behavior that is consistent over time, it is most effective to make small changes periodically. Don't try to completely change your diet from day one and expect that your body will be okay with it and that psychologically you'll be able to do it. You might be able to. I'm not saying you won't. It's just extremely difficult. It's a very discipline-based thing to do, to just completely change into something else. Right? And can be harmful to just completely switch something like that. So start with small changes, start incorporating more of start taking out some of the foods that are high in added sugars or that are super energy dense and not very nutrient dense, and replacing them with small amounts of nutrient dense food, natural foods. And over time, just start to increase the proportion of those healthier foods and decreasing the proportion of those maybe unhealthy foods. See how that's affecting your body, and then continue based on the results there, right? In order to achieve whatever goal you're trying to achieve. Think about how your body feels, right? Not just how it looks, but what's happening to it, but how do you feel on a day-to-day basis? Right? But make those small changes in order to form a successful habit. Okay, so food labels. So factual information about what is in that processed food package that was not always available. Okay? This is something that was only required starting in around 1973. So prior to 1973, there was no requirement for food companies, food industries to be upfront and honest about what is in their products, right? It could say healthy cereal here, right? With no other information for you. And how does a consumer determine if that's true or not? Right? You can't. So anyways, it is now required that there are food labels and nutrition facts panels on all of our processed foods. Okay, so yeah, as of 1990, it got updated even further with more specific guidelines, and thus now almost all foods are going to have some nutritional information on them so that the consumer is aware of what they're purchasing and then putting in their body. So the food label, this is not the same as the nutrition facts panel, right? The nutrition facts panel is a small part of it. That is the part that is typically on the side of a packaging that is listing out all of the different nutrients and how much you're getting of them with percentages. But there's more to it as far as these food labels are concerned. It is required from the different food processing companies to include on their labels or on their packaging. So first, there's a statement of identity. This is simply their common name. This was probably already there to begin with, but common names, your Cheerios, right? Fruity Pebbles, those are the common names. They must include the net contents of that package, so weight, volume, or number amounts. An ingredients list, which is typically found with the nutrition facts panel as well, but that ingredients list is supposed to be in descending order by weight, so by mass. So the first thing on that ingredients list is what is making up, or is essentially the heaviest thing in that food. It makes up the most mass compared to the other ingredients, and then starts to descend. So whatever is at the end of that list is making up the smallest amount of that mass in the food. They must also include the manufacturer's name and address, typically on the very bottom of the front of the package. And then lastly, probably the most important part for the consumer to understand what's in their food is the nutrition facts panel. Okay. So here's everything that we were just discussing with that food label. So sometimes it's on this name and address of the manufacturer is on the top. I tend to see it on the bottom right here with that name and address. Always need to have the common name of the product. There may include some nutrient claims, and we'll talk about which types of claims you might find on a food package, which things require approval and which things do not, and what level of approval. Right? But things like no saturated fat, no trans fat, no cholesterol, that's direct nutritional facts. So those are pretty regular. Again, here's our net content. So 14 ounces or 392 grams of cereal in this box. And then some approved health claims stating how this may be used or what effect this food might have on your total diet. But what is probably the most important part of every food package is going to be this nutrition facts panel. So things to pay attention to are the serving size and the amount of servings per container. I don't think it's very common that someone measures out the amount of cereal they're eating, but I think the servings per container can be a good way to kind of determine how much you're getting from that food, right? If one box of cereal ends up feeding you 14 meals, then you've done a good job of staying within that one serving that they're describing here. The rest of what is on here is describing how much you're getting of each nutrient per serving. So for one serving, depending on what they put up here, so in this case, that is 3/4 of a cup of the cereal. So for one serving of this food, it is providing 110 calories, which is actually kilocalories. They used to be required to add the calories from fat up here. This is no longer a part of our nutrition facts panels. And then listing the various nutrients, often broken down with how much fat is saturated fat and trans fat in that. You'll have your cholesterol, which again is just another type of fat. Your sodium, because that is a commonly overconsumed mineral, at least in American diets. Carbohydrates are broken down into their dietary fiber and added sugars, typically. So you can see how much of these sugars are added versus dietary fiber. And then protein at the very bottom, you get your micronutrients, most of your micronutrients. So sodium is really the only one that makes it on this main list most often. And then you get some of your vitamins and minerals listed down here. Okay. These facts panels are calculating these percent daily values, right? So when you see you are getting 10% of your daily value of sodium from one serving of this food, that 10% is coming from a diet that is based on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, which is not going to be the same for everyone. At some point, this was determined to be the average recommended calorie count, or EER, for a diet in America. And so that became the standard and basis for where we get these values from. Okay, so all of those percent daily values are based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So If your diet plan includes trying to consume less than that, then assume those percentages are going to be higher for you. If your diet plan focuses on consuming more than 2,000 calories a day, then those percentages are going to be a little bit smaller for you. Right? Right. Another thing of note is the order of those nutrients from top to bottom is listed in a way to present them as nutrients that we're trying to limit are listed at the top. And then as you move to the bottom, they're less limiting, or the nutrients that you want a lot of, right? The micronutrients were all the way at the bottom. You typically want as much of those as you can get, because it's really, or on average in America, it's difficult to get all of your micronutrients if you're not actively trying to do it. So they list things like fats, which historically have been avoided, cholesterol historically avoided, sodium historically avoided, right? These are all the things that on average we're trying to limit. Okay. And then in the footnote, the very, very bottom, you have some general advice and comparison. So here's a look at what old nutrition facts panels used to look like, and then our updated ones. So over time, as our understanding of how our nutrients are used gets updated with different research, some of these things are going to change, right? So we're looking at a nutrition facts panel for the same food, just at 2 different times. So this food provides 8 grams of total fat, right? You see that on both panels here. But on the old panel, that was calculated to be 12% of your daily value of fat. 8 grams was 12%. But now the updated recommendations allow us to have a higher intake of fat as far as our AMDR, our calorie distribution. And thus 8 grams is now only 10% of your daily value of fat. Right? Some of those values have been updated, including added sugars is now a really important part of your nutrition facts panel. I think the main things the main things I tend to look at when I'm purchasing food is the amount of trans fat, the amount of sodium, and the amount of added sugars. Other than that, I'm looking for, a good amount of micronutrients or whatever other macronutrient distribution. But as far as things I'm trying to limit and avoid, so those added sugars and trans fats and sodium, right? Trying to make sure I'm not going too high on sodium. So that's new. The way the serving sizes are displayed is a bit new. The daily values have been updated. Or what else did I want to put here? Okay, yeah, the footnote explains how those daily values are calculated, right, based off of a 2,000 calorie diet. Okay. Something to consider when looking at serving sizes and servings per container is that serving size is often less than what a typical person is consuming in one sitting. For a lot of foods, that serving size is typically less than one sitting of that food. But standardization allows for our comparison. So for instance, if you use the MyPlate website or MyPlate guidelines, a 1-inch mini bagel is 1 serving or a 1 ounce equivalent. However, most bagels these days are 4 ounces or larger, especially if you're going to like a bagel shop that makes really delicious and probably natural and yummy bagels, but they're large. Right? It's more than what you're going to find if you look up the nutritional information for 1 serving of a bagel. So just something to keep in mind. If you're not measuring your food, try to get some generalizations if you're going to use that nutrition facts panel. Get an idea of what a 3/4 cup, right, looks like, or what a 2/3 cup of this food looks like. So that in general, I'm not saying you need to measure every time, but in general, you might have an idea of how much of that you're getting. Okay. So on those lists of nutrients, as I've said many times in this video already, our research that backs the idea that you need to be limiting saturated fats and cholesterol is now being revised. We're getting a new understanding. Because sodium is so prevalent in American foods, should generally be trying to avoid it. And then you will also see your carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, and minerals. Okay. I've already kind of gone over this, but the percent daily values that you're seeing on that nutrition facts panel is based on a 2,000 kilocalorie per day diet. Depending on if there are standardized RDA values for that food, you'll either see the reference daily intakes or the daily reference values. They're kind of just the same thing. Again, it's giving us the amount that is recommended to be consumed for a 2,000 kilocalorie diet. All right, cool. I was looking for this slide. So here you can see the updated values that are now being used as far as how much of each nutrient is recommended for a 2,000 calorie diet. So the updated values allow for a higher amount of fat. They recommend even a little bit less sodium than they were before, a little bit less carbohydrates, so fat just taking up a higher proportion of your distribution of calories than it was before. Recommending a higher amount of fiber. Before, they were not showing, or there wasn't a standardized measurement or recommendation for how many added sugars. Really, in general, trying to reduce this number as much as possible is generally likely to lead to a healthier decision. I recommend more vitamin D. Again, especially, or I guess I say again, but in my online section, we haven't talked about this, but in a state like Washington, where we are so far north of the equator, in winter months, so for about half of the year, a little bit less than half of the year, the Earth is tilted on its axis so to the point that the sun's rays are getting distorted by the time they reach us here on Earth. And so typically, our skin is going to be stimulated to produce its own vitamin D in response to the sun's UV rays. But during the winter, with that tilt, those rays are getting distorted. They're not penetrating our skin deep enough to reach the pigments that would recognize them and then produce vitamin D. And so it is very common to have a vitamin D deficit in these northern states in colder areas if you're not taking a supplement or eating foods with vitamin D in it. There's also products like Happy Lights, which is a tiny little light you could have on your desk or on your table at home or something. And I don't remember exactly how long they recommend sitting in front of it, but I think it's just like 30 minutes to an hour per day to help with that vitamin D stimulation. Anyways, a very common deficit related to like mental health disorders or general sadness during those times of the year when we aren't producing our own vitamin D. What else here? A higher recommendation of potassium. Okay. Just some small changes based on updated information. Okay. I also wanted to provide an example of a sample menu from some of these dietary guidelines. So I'm not going to spend much time here, but you can take some time to look at this. This diet reaches 1,600 kilocalories and meets those dietary recommendations for the distribution of the different macronutrients that you're getting. It's varied, right? It's doing all the good stuff. So just an example for you to look through. Okay, that's where I'll stop this video, and I'll record another one about applying this information to actually choosing your foods or eating out. So I'll see you in the next one.